G'day and welcome back to the best Morris Minor channel in the world. Lol, complete jokes. Please don't take that seriously. Alright, so on this quick episode, I'm just going to be running through what I've been up to on the Morris Minor to date. So at the moment, as you can see, we have Grace over my shoulder. We have a heap of stuff I'm going to be getting done to her, and a couple of little things I want to be adding in there, which I haven't discussed with you guys, but you can maybe see the engine's out just over there. Yoo-hoo, just over there. Anyway, so back to the Morris Minor. So we're up to the stage now where we are getting this thing ready to have the engine properly installed. Now, as you can see, a bit of modification has gone on since you last saw it. Essentially what I've done is I have put the cylinder head on, and I found that it was touching against the firewall just here all the way along. So even with it like that, with the gearbox in there, with the plate we're going to be running, which is just down here on the ground, it's pretty much going to be that thick. So that's the gearbox there. We then have that measurement even further back. So it's pretty much going to sit probably a good 2.5 inches back from the back of the block to here. Now there is no way in hell that this thing is going to fit. Now it's not just touching here, but it was also touching up underneath where the back of the gearbox bell housing is. So this bit here. So originally I just had it cut to here, which as you can see, there is a seam all the way along here. Well, there was. It goes all the way along. Originally I just cut it to here where this little notch is cut out here. I do have to fabricate one to look like this because this is a triangle and this is a squared off section. So I'm going to make like a little triangle bit here and then fab it up there. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. So what I'm going to be doing essentially, or what I did was I just trimmed it to here. It was just touching there, but because of the spacer that we're running here, I figured, well, I need to push it back further. Hence why I cut it out back to there. Now, essentially, you can probably see here, it's not completely straight. This bit here has a high spot, this is a low spot. Essentially, I'm just going to trim it so it's flat all the way along. Do the same all the way along here, clean up all the edges, and then I'm just going to box it out. So I'm just going to get a piece of cardboard, trace out where I need it to go from here to the corner, all the way along to the end, get that shape, get this shape just here, get a section from here to here, and then make a plate. That way it'll just be nice and smooth. Tack it all in, finish welding it. Probably have to weld it from underneath as well, I reckon. So that's going to be fun. Probably have to take the gearbox and engine back out, which isn't a drama. It's all part and parcel of it. Once it's all welded in, grind it, and then we're going to prime it and we're going to paint the engine bay. Now, as you can see, there are some old bolts sitting on either side, and that's the old plate, which I won't get too close on just so you don't see numbers. Essentially, because we need to get the engine bay painted, I'm just going to get this thing to the point where it's pretty much ready to rock and roll, and I'm ready to get this thing on the road. Now, at the moment, we have the diff, we have the axle, we have the transmission cross member, which is great. I have the front brakes. I think we're missing the front drums. We've got spindle repair kits. We're getting new leaf springs coming in. I've got new rear shocks, shock links. We've got all new brake pipes. All that stuff needs to get fitted before we can then put it on a car trailer, send it down to the painter, get them to paint it, bring it back, and then we can start the reassembly process. The cylinder head unfortunately had a couple of dilemmas. Sadly, what happened was he sold me a head, well, Colin sold me a head, and then it wasn't until the very end when he had finished porting it that he realized that it had 2 giant cracks in it, which he obviously couldn't see with the naked eye until he'd gotten to that point, which then pretty much deemed it unusable. So then he had to go get another head. So he actually got 2 cylinder heads, sent it away, got them ported, should I say, converted to unleaded, all that jazz, made sure everything's fine. So as long as everything's fine there, fingers crossed, we should be right moving forward with the rest of the build. Once it comes back, it's pretty much all hands on deck to get this thing underway. So before we send it to paint, I do have to remove all the wiring, the speedo cable, the horn, the brake pipes, all that jazz. As you can see here, I have ran some conduit around the outside of this pipe, and I've also run a bit of felt tape. It just helps clean it up, but because I have to take everything out, I figured, well, I might as well do everything else while I'm there. So we'll pull everything out, get everything out of the car, pretty much leave the bonnet cable, I think, attached. Everything off the firewall is going to go. So it's pretty much going to be painted from this end to here, top to bottom, and then pretty much up to the line just along here. So there's a seam just there. That'll be pretty much all painted. Everything will be out of there. They'll freshly paint it. That way the customer gets it back and he's got a nicely freshly painted rebuilt engine and gearbox, but he's also got a nice tidy engine bay. So that's this deal with that. What's next? But before we can do that, we also need wheels, because at the moment the old wheels were 4 by 1 inch, I think, Please someone correct me. And the new wheels we've got are 4 by 1.5 inches. So the old wheels off the Morris Minor MM, the side valve engine, won't fit the later model stuff. Now, because the avenue had to go down with this thing, we changed engine, we changed gearbox, changed drive shaft, we had to change diff to suit. The new diff has a different stud pattern compared to the old one, which then meant we had to change the front hubs, which we've got new hubs and new bearings, which you guys will see on another episode. And once we've changed that, we then need to buy different wheels. So a bit of a snowball effect in it, and it happened pretty quick. So there was probably a couple of things there that I probably need to, I wouldn't say address, but I probably needed to keep the customer informed about. Obviously, along the entire way, he's been informed of everything, but I kind of hit a bit of a point where I felt pretty bad the other day. I was chatting to him about it because he was wanting to know how much more we're going to spend on it, and once I'd worked it out, it was obviously a bit more than what we had anticipated. But, you know, those are the things that you come across when you're restoring a car. So if you're watching out there, to the customer, mate, I do apologise for, you know, not being as transparent as probably should be. But look, moving forward, I have addressed the issues, or not that there was any issues, but, you know, we've pretty much settled on everything, which is really good. We've got a heap of stuff planned, which is really mad. I'm super excited to get this thing finished. Pretty much once we get it back from paints and we got the engine, we've mocked up all this stuff, it's going to be downhill from there. It's all just going to pretty much come together pretty quick, I'd imagine, or in episodes anyway. So at the time of filming, I do have plenty of time on my hands, but this series will probably run through to the end of the year, which isn't a drama, but, you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this goes and how it comes. But also some of this wiring, I'm just super keen to clean up, so I'm sorry that I'm jumping all over the place. I want to try and make this quick. Here's, you know, just electrical tape and just looks like crap. Like this wire here, I'm going to get another one. We're going to replace that and get it all cleaned up. But look, next episode, I think what I might do, or probably even in this episode, should I say, I'm just going to show you the box section that I finished off. I'm going to weld it in, I'm going to grind it, get everything all nice and clean. Then we also need to look at doing a hydraulic clutch conversion. So that's going to be a lot of dicking around for us to be able to do, but I'm excited to do it. It should be fairly straightforward. We have obviously accounted for it, but yeah, that's where we're up to. So let's keep cracking on, and I'll show you the next scene once I finish fabricating these brackets and welding them in. Now, the reason why I didn't show you how I cut everything, what I did, etc., simply because, you know, there's plenty of videos out there, but also if I document absolutely everything along the way, it takes so long to do anything. Like, I probably spent about an hour and a half grinding and cutting all this. If I'd done it whilst filming, I probably would have spent 4 hours doing it and then compressed it into like a 15-minute video. So I do apologise. Hopefully there will be more stuff down the track in which I can show you guys, but let's keep chugging along and get this thing ready for paint. Alright, so we are coming to an end of modifying the engine bay in the Morris Minor. So as I said, I didn't film a lot of it simply because it is quite slow, tedious, and quite frankly boring. Well, I reckon anyway. There was a lot involved in this. There was a lot of measuring, cutting, welding, grinding, welding, cutting, grinding, and it just kept going around in circles like that. But it's pretty easy to fab up some brackets. So let's have a look and see what we've done so far. So I've had this engine in and out now probably, oh my goodness, probably 8 to 10 times. So as you can see, the bracket that I've welded in here, it's not all that great at the moment. I do need to touch it up. There are some patches I do need to fill in with a little bit of weld just around the sides. Finish welding. It's not completely done at the moment. All the edges are still quite rough, so it's just a quick coat of primer that I put on there. Also need to grind back these edges. I might run a little bit of seam sealer down the edges and underneath as well. That way it'll keep it nice and clean. I could probably even run a bit of seam sealer around the edges here. That way it looks factory, but also helps to seal it and keep out any debris that might be in there. Before we send it off to paint, I'm gonna have to get it completely ready. So essentially all I need to do is just rub the entire engine bay down. Once everything's out of it, obviously, which will be another episode, they're gonna rub the entire thing down, everything's gonna be out of it, and then they're gonna give it a coat of primer, and then they're gonna paint the entire thing. So it's all gonna be the same color. On the outside, they probably won't even touch the bonnet, I'd imagine. So I need to make sure as well that some of these bolts, I'll just reuse them for now. When it does get painted, I do need to make sure that I replace them. Also, the top bump stop as well, there needs to be another hole here. It might just be a stud, but I might have to drill a hole, I believe, for where it is, because the driver's side has one, but this one looks like it has one, but it also has a nut on the inside, so I'd say it's probably got a stud. Anyway, let me know in the comment section, anyone that knows about those. With the struts as well, or not the strut, sorry, the upper control arm, which is also the shock absorber, which is just down there, this sucker right here. In order to get it painted, we need to have it in there, but also I need to mount it long enough and then come along, remove, sorry for the helicopter, I need to be able to remove the shock absorber because it is part of the suspension. We then need to jack it up inside the spray booth, and then they can work on getting it primed and painted. So it is a little bit of dicking around. I'll probably need to go there after hours to get all this done, because obviously both sides needs to be done. I can't just leave it like this, because otherwise the suspension is just going to hang completely apart, which you probably can't see at the moment because I don't have a torch. There we go. So yeah, it will hang back completely like that, so there's no point in sending it to them like this. Obviously the whole suspension is just going to move individually, and it's going to be super unsafe. Even just pushing it on and off a trailer, it's not really going to have a proper steering and that sort of thing. So I've had to modify this a bit more than expected. So as you can see, with the bracket, sorry, not the bracket, the plates that I've got here, this is significantly thicker than the original one. The original one's only probably 2 mil thick, I reckon. There is a little bit of wiring I need to fix up here as well, so I'll cut all that back once all the wiring is out of it and fix all of that. That's not an issue, that's a pretty easy fix actually. I did that with the grinder. I think it was a little bit closer than expected. Anyway, so this plate is 7 mil thicker than the original one. So because it was round and came all the way out here, I had to notch this section out here of the lower part of the bulkhead. So essentially I'm just going to grind this down, make that all nice and smooth, finish up the edges so it's all nice and flush down here. And what I had to do, as you can see, I had to machine off and cut not a fair amount, but just a bit off here to ensure that it properly mounts on here. Now there is just a little bit more down here I need to do, which I'll do a bit later on, and same with the top up there as well, in order to make that fit. Now the problem that I was having was the engine was not completely square in the engine bay. I'll just reposition that torch. Wasn't completely square in the engine bay, which made it quite hard because the back of the engine was over this way a little bit, which then meant the gearbox was right off center, and then it wouldn't line up with the diff, it wouldn't line up with the gearbox mount. So I really had to persevere to make sure that that cleared. Once that cleared, I could then ensure that it was going to be straight. So it's still slightly off, but it is much better than what it has been. It does still need to go over just a fraction, but we're going to work out that later. So let's jump inside the car and have a look to see what we've done. Yes, there is some fertilizer on the ground. I did have it stored underneath the car. Oh, sorry, I'll grab a torch so we can probably see what we're doing. Now, I do have the carpet and stuff pulled up. I do have a sheet over there, that way any grinding sparks, it's going to catch it in the sheet. So here we are inside the car. So essentially, we've got it mounted, we've got the cross member mounted, we got each of the gearbox mounts, one on each side. Now the support's not properly in, but it'll be fine for now, it'll be all right. It just needs to be able to hold it in there. We've pretty much lined up with where it needs to be, and we've got the tail shaft on there as well. We also have a new panel down here, which I'll show you guys where this is going to go. Apparently we also need to change the handbrake as well, so we'll see about that. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to, but it might be a good idea to change it. So see if I can just do this one-handed, which might be a little bit difficult. Essentially that plate is going to go directly up here, which is then going to cover majority of the tunnel. So it's going to sit here just like this, and we've got a handbrake just there. So if we just stop moving the camera, bring it down here, it's going to have to come back a little bit further, which means we're probably going to have to get a shorter handbrake, which isn't a drama. We can probably get one from a classic Mini, I reckon. So I do need to cut out the rest of the floor in order to mount this properly, although I could probably just leave it like this. So where I've got it cut out at the moment underneath the tunnel, it's probably going to be okay. So I'll probably mark it out, drill some holes in here, and then that way I can just put some, maybe tack some nuts on the opposite side, or even run a couple of just a bolt and nut, I guess, on either side, or the other thing, which I forget what it's called, which I'll probably remember in a minute. Now the brake master cylinder is underneath the driver's floor, and we also needed to accommodate for the clutch pedal coming up through here. So as you can see, I did have to cut that bit out on the side, which I would imagine the clutch pedal on a later model would probably come out through here. Now, because they're probably going to sit about level with each other, I need to work out where it's going to sit. So I've got the return spring in the right spot, and it's got to stop as well. So that is another issue which we can address later, but it should be fairly straightforward. As you can see, we've got the switch for the high beam. So that's pretty much that done. I'm going to get this sandblasted, because even though you're not going to see it, it's just a good idea for the customer to know that I've actually gone ahead and powder coated, sandblasted some things at the moment. So that is all on point. So the next thing we need to look at is going to be this down here. So here we are underneath the car. So as you can see, everything is mounted, everything's on, or pretty much everything. I just need to make sure that the gearbox bracket sits up a little bit higher, which it's going to sit fine. It probably just means that I need to probably cut a little bit more out of the tunnel to make sure that the yoke joint doesn't touch there. Now, oh, get rid of that because that's just a bit of dag. Now it does have a reverse light switch, so I'll see if it has a reverse light connected to it. If not, that's cool. We can leave that disconnected because a lot of cars back in the 60s didn't come out with it. So I'm really happy now with how this sits. In regards to the, where are we? Over here. Let's just turn the camera around. Now, in order to mount the slave cylinder, essentially this is the pedal there. So what I'm going to do is just find a stop, and then I'm probably going to mount the slave cylinder about where my finger is here on the left hand side, and then that way when you push it, sorry, no, it's going to have to go the opposite way. So it's going to have to go, it's going to have to push the piston this way because that is currently depressed at the moment. So we just have to work that out, how that's going to work in order to make this correctly function. So we might need to run it on the backside of here, which, you know, as I said, we can address that later. That's not an issue just at the moment. So we might just need to run a push rod from here to the other side, but we can work that out later. Now, the reason why I got rid of the setup that we had originally is because this little pin just here was touching the side of the gearbox. So I might try and fabricate it off the original setup, which I don't think is going to work because it is going to touch the side of the gearbox, and it's not really worthwhile having this touch. Simply because when it's mounted, we're going to have clearance issues and stuff. So I might just leave that there, see how it goes once I finish doing everything. If I need to trim it off, then I will, but if not, then I can leave it. Now, also, in order for me to weld the bottom part of that bracket, which you can kind of see just up through there, I do need to remove the steering rack. So it's just two nuts on either side. I need to remove the wiring for the headlight switch, or the high beam switch, sort of say, and then just the tie rod and nuts on either side, and then pull the entire rack out, and then I need to weld it from underneath. That will enable us to properly weld and then seal in that component, or that little bit that I made. So there's that. Also, we have, I'll just move that torch again. Okay, so there's our prop shaft and a diff. Now at the moment the diff isn't seated properly because it's not held in by the U-bolts, but oh, sorry, I'll just try and mount the camera somewhere where you guys can see it's not going to fall. So essentially that's going to sit there directly like that. That is exactly where it needs to sit, and it's going to spin nice and freely. It's not going to bind, it's not going to grab, it's not going to do anything abnormal. Now it is worthwhile noting as well that down that end, where the bolts go in, it only goes in 2 out of 4 different ways. So essentially you need to make sure that you line it up, and if you don't, you're pretty much going to have a bad time. So what I'm going to also do is take the diff out. We're going to get the diff powder coated. I'm going to pull the diff center out. I'm just going to spray that silver, so that way it's nice and clean. I'm going to clean up as best I can. I was going to originally paint the drive shaft, but I figured, you know, I'm going to have to strip everything apart, and you know, it's in pretty good nick for what it is, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. Look, other than that, I think that's pretty much where we need to be. In regards to this build, I do need to work out a couple little bit of you know, extra things, like I was saying with the clutch master cylinder. The slave cylinder will be fine. Essentially, we're just going to run probably just a steel line or
flexible hose at some point and just fabricate that. We can do that when he gets back from paint. It's not an issue. It's not like we have to sort it out right now. It just means that anything that I cut under here, I'm going to have to stone guard as well and just weatherproof paints and prime, so that's all good. But there's been a lot of things on this car that I've noticed that doesn't seem to be factory. That seems to be as if someone's had a go of it. So it'll just be a case of working out exactly what it is we need to do to move forward. So like I said, guys, I do apologize that I didn't film a lot of this, because as I said, cutting and welding and stuff, I could have spent probably, you know, days, you know, and even episodes on this just showing you guys how to do it. Essentially, I just got bits of cardboard, I used a texter, I traced as much as I could, cut it out, and then just trimmed it until I got the right shape. Once I got the right shape, I then transferred that to a bit of steel. I then cut out the steel, put it in, ground it so it was nice and clean surfaces, then welded, tacked it in, and then once I was happy with where it was, put the next piece in, etc, until I was happy where everything was, then I started welding it in. So she is pretty much on target with where we need to be. So it is a lot of dicking around and doing this sort of thing when you're making these sort of modifications to any car. It could just be, you know, an old Morris Minor like this, or it could be something even more special. It could be a later model car. You could be putting a W12 in a Hyundai Getz. You know, there's so many different options. And the good thing about this is, and I was talking to Paul Jeffries the other day, was that chances are anything that you guys do or anything that you do in life, chances are someone's already probably done it. So you're likely not the first person to ever do what you're trying to achieve. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You just got to remember that when you're doing this as well, that things are also going to go really slow. When things go really slow, you just got to be really patient with it. There is a lot of dicking around. Like I said, I probably took this engine out, you know, at least 10 times, and it is a lot of screwing around doing it. It's a lot of fitting, trial, error, fitting, trial, error, fitting, trial, error, and you just literally do circle work until you work it out. But then when you get there, it's all pretty straightforward. So next thing I'm going to be doing on this is we're going to be stripping the diff. We're going to get that ready for powder coat. That's pretty much the largest thing that we need to get powder coated next, along with a heap of other things that we need to do. Other than that, I think we're pretty much on target with where we need to be. Once you get it back from powder coating, I can then get this thing rolling. So we need to swap over the front wheel bearings. We need to rebuild the front suspension, which I might do on another episode. I'm not going to just film it as part of, you know, reassembling everything, because it'll just probably be too long. I got the new wheels for it as well. Once we have it as a rolling shell, we then need to take everything out of the engine bay. Once everything's out of the engine bay and it's a roller, we then send it down to paint. We then get it painted, so forth and so on. When we get it back from paint, it's pretty much all hands on deck. We get this thing back together, I think, fairly quick. So at the moment, we have had this car for probably 3 months now, I reckon, and it's taken us all this time to get to where we are. So it is one of those things where, as I said, it does take a lot of time to be able to get this done, but you can do it. It is just a very slow and tedious process. So, you know, at some stage you kind of feel like you've probably bitten off more than you can chew, but it is important to know, as I said, A, people have likely done it before, and B, that, you know, these things just take time. Rome wasn't built in a day. Just give it time, effort, money, and just give it all your patience. Just slowly work at it. And anyone restoring a car, you know, the satisfaction of restoring something like this, you know, and making it so much better is worth the reward. And that's exactly, you know, what the philosophy is that I feel that I need to, you know, get across, not just to myself, to you guys, but also the customer as well. That way the customer knows that, you know, what they're buying from me and what I'm doing for them is going to be worth and hopefully exceed their expectations, which I imagine it probably would, given, you know, the amount of modifications we've done, but also the engine changes. So yeah, that's it for this episode. We do have a lot more to go. I'm just going to keep chipping away. Like I said, next episode will be to do with the diff. We'll do the front axles, we get that going, start stripping the engine bay, send it to paint, and then we're pretty much ready to rock and roll. Well, like always, guys, that's the episode. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned, and we'll see you right here on another episode of the world's best Morris Minor YouTube channel. Just kidding. Right here on another episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups.